You step through the obsidian gates of Empress Niara's palace, the most majestic court in all of Dizamara. The floors beneath you glisten like molten glass, reflecting the golden glow of oil lamps that sway gently in carved ebony sconces. Gilded pillars tower above, carved with scenes of ancestral glory. Velvet drapes embroidered with sapphires sway softly as royal concubines glide past, their silk gowns whispering secrets with every movement. This is the heart of a kingdom built on power, beauty, and legacy. You inhale deeply, expecting the scent of incense and jasmine. Instead, a sharp bitterness hits your nostrils. Something rotting. Something masked. And just like that, the illusion shatters. You blink. And suddenly, everything that dazzled a moment ago feels tainted. That trail of perfume wafting from the Empress's passage. A desperate cloud meant to hide decay. That soft rustle of her satin gown covers a body that hasn't touched clean water in weeks. This isn't the fantasy whispered by poets in candlelit taverns. This is the raw truth behind the regality, the real world of royal women like Empress Niara, who ruled half a continent but went months without bathing. Her inner court was a shrine to beauty and poison. The air wasn't just thick with incense, it pulsed with the scent of fermented oils, unwashed fabric, and perfumed animal fat. The women were goddesses by sight and tormented vessels beneath. Their faces pale with layers of crushed pearl and white ash, cracked like dry earth. Their skin itched constantly beneath layers of makeup that hadn't been removed in over a month. The palace servants whispered of her morning routine. Fresh white powder layered over yesterday's dried paste, every day for years. No water. Number. Removal. Just a growing mask of poison to maintain an image of divine perfection. They said when she finally bathed, the water turned black within seconds. Filled with layers of lead, sweat, oils, and the stench of a body slowly poisoning itself in pursuit of beauty. Still, Empress Niara stood tall, every inch the embodiment of celestial authority. Her voice commanded armies, her gaze silenced warlords. But beneath her golden robes and towering wig, her scalp festered, her breath reeked of vinegar and decay, and her body groaned under the weight of toxins disguised as elegance. This was not rare. This was the norm. Queens, duchesses, and noblewomen across Dizamara and beyond lived trapped inside these elaborate cages of beauty. They couldn't cleanse themselves without risking judgment. Water was seen as dangerous exposure meant vulnerability. So they hid under perfume, powder, and pride. Every gesture, every glance, every smile concealed unimaginable discomfort, and yet they carried it all with grace. They ruled nations while their skin crawled with vermin. They hosted banquets while their wigs hid open sores. They danced at moonlit galas while praying no one smelled the truth beneath their rose oil. Their strength wasn't just in their crowns. It was in their ability to suffer silently poised. Proud and poisoned while never breaking the illusion of royal perfection, the palace was a painting, beautiful from a distance. But step too close, and you'd see it was layered with blood, sweat, or tanned the silent agony of the women who ruled from within. It was known across the empire that when the full moon rose over the marble towers of Dizamara, one ritual shook the palace walls and silenced the empress's bath. Not a daily indulgence, not a weekly reprieve. A single bath. Once a month, at the first whisper of the ritual, over 40 servants sprang into motion like a secret army. Fires blazed in the lower kitchens before dawn, boiling copper pots of water for hours. The bathtub, carved from polished obsidian and inlaid with river jade, sat alone in the imperial bathing chamber, hollow throne for a goddess wrapped in decay. No one spoke as they prepared the chamber. Silence was sacred, not out of reverence, but out of fear. The ritual wasn't just uncomfortable, it was horrifying. Empress Niara bathed not to cleanse but to peel. For 30 days, her body had been caked in layers of white Sadasha toxic paste made of crushed bone ash, vinegar, and lead dust. Its pale shimmer masked imperfections and gave her the illusion of moon-kissed divinity. But it also suffocated. Her pores ate away at her skin, and left her breath reeking of metal. As her royal robe was removed, the chamber grew tense. Her body, hidden for weeks under silk, powder, and ceremonial oils, was a battlefield. Her back bore the pattern of old fabric stuck to flesh. Her legs shimmered with clotted layers of sweat and paste. Her face, once a symbol of ethereal beauty, was now a cracked mosaic of peeling white, grayed with age and damage. The moment her skin touched the steaming water, the illusion collapsed. The bath hissed. The surface turned murky with dead skin. Melted powder, dried oils, and something darker, something no one could name. The stench rolled through the chamber like smoke from a poisoned fire. Vinegar, sweat, iron, decay. A servant once vomited, trying to suppress the gag. Reflex. He was replaced the next morning. No one ever spoke his name again. The paste peeled away in ribbons, floating like wilted petals on a black sea. Beneath it, her skin was red, raw, and blistered. Her scalp, once hidden by her towering, jeweled. Wig oozed sores from weeks of suffocation beneath ox fat and powdered lavender. Her fingernails were stained gray. Her breath could curdle milk, but she sat upright. Regal eyes forward, she did not flinch, did not waver, did not complain, because this was duty. This was the price of majesty in a world that demanded its rulers. Appear divine. No one dared speak of the sores or the peeling flesh. Instead, they praised the softness of her skin, the glow of her face. The divine light that shimmered on her shoulders, even as that light came from the reflection of filth being scrubbed away by trembling hands. Once she was dried and repainted fresh. Layers of poison smeared across skin that had barely healed, Empress Niara returned to court. The hall fell silent at her presence, mistaking her glow for beauty rather than pain. She smiled with cracked lips. Her breath stung the air. One flinched. The mask had returned. The illusion was complete. And so, month after month, she sat upon a throne of gold, with skin burning beneath velvet and pearl, her body rotting under the weight of royal perfection. Her empire never knew the truth. They never saw the water. At sunrise, the palace maids approached the chambers of Empress Niara in silence, each carrying a polished ivory bowl filled with a creamy white paste that shimmered under the flicker of firelight. This was Sadash, the sacred powder, a mixture of vinegar, ash, pearl dust, and lead ground so fine it floated through the air like snowfall. No water was brought, no cloths for washing. Water was feared. Water was dangerous. So instead, the maids applied fresh Sadash directly over what remained from the day before, one layer at a time, day after day, year. Empress Niara never questioned the practice. Her mother had worn it. Her grandmother had died wearing it. It was a symbol of celestial purity in a world that demanded perfection from its queens. Pale skin meant virtue. Pale skin meant nobility. Pale skin meant control. So even as the mixture burned and bubbled on her face, she endured it because to remove it was to invite shame. What no one spoke aloud was what it was doing to her mind. She began forgetting things. Little things at first. A name. A phrase. The placement of a signature. Then, moments of silence in the middle of court, her mouth open but no words arriving. Courtiers whispered of stress, of burdens too heavy for any one soul. But the truth was buried in the paste itself. The lead seeped into her blood, through pores suffocated for years. It settled into her bones, her brain, her memory. Her moods turned violent. Sweet laughter one moment, a shattered vase the next. She screamed at servants for invisible offenses, then sobbed when they fled the room. Ministers began scripting their reports like plays, guessing what version of the Empress they'd meet each morning. And still, every sunrise, the Sadash returned. It stole her hair first. One morning she woke to find clumps on her pillow, her scalp dotted with angry red spots. Wigs became heavier, more elaborate, more adorned. Then it took her skin tightening it, graying it, making each new layer of makeup thicker to hide the damage beneath. Her lips darkened, her teeth loosened, her eyes grew dull, and still, she smiled before her people. Still, she wore gowns that touched the floor and spoke of glory and justice. Still, nobles bowed and called her Radiant One. But no one dared breathe too close. The smell of lead and vinegar mingled with rot. Her once sweet breath turned, so acrid that advisors stood 4 paces away when speaking. Yet none dared stop the ritual. None dared question the tradition. None dared break the illusion, because behind that pale, cracking mask was a queen dying in slow motion, addicted to an image she couldn't escape, a prisoner in her own skin. The white dust was her armor, but it was also her executioner. Every morning, it gave her the face of a goddess. Every night, it stole a little more of her soul, and still. The palace celebrated her beauty. They called it divine. They didn't realize they were watching a woman vanish one layer at a time. No. One whispered it out loud, but everyone in the citadel of Zanchuria knew. The palace crawled, not with servants, not with rumors, but with lice. It began with King Aedweltha, Iron Sovereign, a man who ruled with fire in his voice and silence in his footsteps. He wore his robes for months without change, claimed that true warriors did not bathe like peasants, and believed that water invited weakness into the bones. He bathed once a season, if at all. He was draped in tiger-hide cloaks lined with gold thread, jeweled rings on every finger, and a ceremonial hat that never left his head. Not even during sleep. Not even during feasts. Not even when he was alone. But beneath the opulence, his skin itched, his scalp blistered, and his hat, his crown of pride, became a living nest. It wasn't long before the infestation spread beyond the throne room. Pillows in the guest chambers twitched with tiny movements. Upholstered chairs gave off strange shivers. Visitors would sit for a conversation and rise scratching. Courtiers developed a new etiquette. Bow with your back straight, leave swiftly, and never touch the tapestries. Lady Iphema, a high noble from the Eastern Highlands, once attended an audience with the king. She returned to her quarters feeling a tickle behind her ear. By nightfall, she was scratching like a madwoman. Her hair, once braided with diamonds, had become a battleground. Within a week, half her household was crawling. No one was safe. Not the advisors, not the handmaidens. Not the children of the palace who played beneath silk drapes that harbored colonies. Parasites danced between the embroidered threads like it was their kingdom. The women of court adopted tools. Long sticks made of ivory and bone carved with royal sigils were slipped into their sleeves and pockets. They used them to reach deep into their towering hairstyles, scratching in quiet desperation as they walked or sat. Some even decorated them with rubies and gold fashion, disguising torment. The queen, regal and proud, wore a fortress of powdered curls, held together with bare fat and crushed orchids. The scent masked decay, but the warmth bred life. Thrived in her crown an empire within an empire, and every time she smiled at a guest, there were insects crawling along the ridge of her scalp, just out of sight. Court officials began crafting distance rituals. Advisors learned to stand precisely, 5 paces from royalty, not just for respect, but for safety. Servants placed perfumed oil at key positions in rooms, not to please the senses, but to mask the acrid scent of rotting hair and insect waste. The palace became a place of performance wear. Scratching was hidden behind silken fans, where guests bowed while suppressing urges to claw at their skin. Where royal gowns sparkled while carrying colonies of biting creatures. But perhaps the most disturbing truth was how normal it became. Etiquette evolved. There were rules for how to scratch during dinner, when to excuse oneself for lice-related emergencies, even how to groom a royal wig without disturbing the ecosystem. What began as infestation became identity. King Aedwale, mighty and adored, addressed his people from a throne infested with parasites, and they cheered done aware that power now shared its chamber with thousands of tiny creatures, feeding on the blood of a king who hadn't felt clean skin in years. And still, the court moved on. Dancing, toasting, scratching, because to be royal in Zanchier wasn't to be clean, it was to suffer in silence, elegantly. The air inside the royal court of Herendra shimmered with scent. not the clean fragrance of nature, not the light touch of jasmine or lavender. No, this was an overwhelming, cloying, stomach-turning storm of scent. Heavy clouds of musk, civet, burning amber, something sickly sweet like wilted flowers soaked in wine and sweat. And at the center of this war of smells sat Queen Adesina, her face unreadable behind layers of lead-white sadash and her body. Cloaked in cinnamon oils thick enough to stain the marble floor beneath her throne, perfume was no longer a luxury. It was survival. The court was dying in its own stench. 100 nobles packed into one chamber, none of them laundered. Their bodies festered beneath velvet and lace, rotting from inside out. And so the royals adapted by waging war on scent itself. Sachets filled with crushed myrrh were sewn into gowns. Gloves were soaked in rose oil before being slipped onto decaying fingers. Servants lit bundles of dried herbs in corners of every hallway, smoke trailing like prayers to the gods of odor. Queen Adesina wore perfume like armor. Her wrists were rubbed with ground frankincense, her neck powdered with ambergris. Her skirts held hidden pockets of spiced wax that melted slowly from her body heat, releasing scent throughout the day like a defensive spell. When she moved, a cloud followed, blinding, intoxicating, nauseating. But it was never enough, because beneath all the oil and powder was something no. The fragrance could kill, the smell of rot, of sweat that had dried and re-dried for weeks, of teeth turned, black under-powdered breath, of sores hidden beneath corsets, of rooms where nobles relieved themselves in corners, then covered the spot with lavender petals. Visitors from neighboring kingdoms often arrived in awe of the palace's golden halls and silk tapestries, but left vomiting from the scent. Some collapsed in the gardens, others refused to return, and still the court pressed on. Perfume became politics. Certain smells were signs of loyalty. If you wore Queen Adesina's signature blend of saffron and oak wood, you declared yourself part of her inner circle. Rivals wore cinnamon and cassia. Lovers wore bergamot. Traitors smelled of nothing. The queen's advisors would sniff the air before entering rooms, gauging tensions based on the aroma. Ministers covered their mouths with perfumed cloths as they spoke policy. Lovers exchanged handkerchiefs scented with oils instead of letters. And when disease broke out, no one blamed the filth. They blamed bad perfume combinations, scent clashes, they called them. It became a hierarchy of smell. The richer the fragrance, the higher your status. Those who couldn't afford the rarest oils were pushed to the outer corners of court, shamed. Not for lack of manners, but for failing the scent war. Women wept over dried sachets. Men bled for access to the perfumer's private chamber. And still, no one bathed, because scent had become a substitute for cleanliness, a mask over a festering wound, and Queen Adesina, draped in pearls, smiling through a mouth that hadn't felt water in months, led the charge into madness. This was no longer hygiene. This was hallucination. A palace built on scent, a kingdom dying under it, in the empire of Keturah. There was no position more in Vita and no duty more revolting than that of the royal seat-bearer. He was not a general, not a priest, not a minister. He was the one who carried the emperor's toilet. His name was Obasi, and he wore silk robes like any noble, gold rings on his fingers, and the imperial seal pinned to his chest. But his hands smelled of waste, and his dignity lived beneath a throne carved not of ivory, but of shame. Every day he followed Emperor Kamau through shadowed halls, always a few steps behind. Clutching the throne box, a handcrafted wooden toilet lined with cloth and oils to soften the horror of what was inside. When the emperor had to relieve himself, Obasi prepared the box, waited in silence, and knelt behind him with cloth soaked in rose water and lime. The emperor never touched himself. That was Obasi's sacred task, and yet no man in court had more power, because Obasi saw what no other eyes were allowed to see. He knew that the emperor, draped in lion fur cloaks and crowned with obsidian, suffered from weeping sores between his legs, that his diet bloated with meat and wine left his bowels twisted and bleeding, that each time he sat on the box he grunted like a beast and wept softly when he thought no one could hear. Obasi knew when the emperor's pain was real and when it was staged. He knew which foods triggered violent eruptions. He knew which herbs the healers lied about and which ones offered real relief. More than the physicians. More than the queen. He was the emperor's mirror in his most vulnerable moments. And the emperor told him everything. While seated on the box, Kamo confessed. His fears, his dreams, his doubts. He named enemies. He questioned his generals. He dictated secret policies. Decrees that would send thousands to war were whispered, while Obasi wiped his master's unwashed body. This was power. Wrapped in filth, Obasi learned to keep his face. Still, no gagging, no flinching, no emotion. He memorized the stench of decay, the texture of infected flesh, the sound of a gut tearing itself apart. He became a student of the emperor's health because the fate of the nation was tied to his stomach. Court nobles feared him. They bowed low, offered gifts, and listened when he spoke. Because if Obasi said the emperor would not attend council, then the emperor would not. If Obasi said a minister should be avoided, that minister vanished from favor. He held power not with weapons, but with knowledge so private that to speak it aloud could ruin kingdoms. The irony. Young men across Katura prayed for this role. Fathers told their sons, if you want to rise, serve at the seat. They saw only the gold that Obasi wore, not the hours he spent scrubbing royal waste from legs that hadn't seen water in weeks, not the silence he was forced to keep while ulcers festered and breath reeked of rot, not the smell that never left. His skin, no matter how much sandalwood he rubbed on his arms, Obasi aged in silence. But in silence he ruled. When Emperor Kamau finally died, bloated and septic, Obasi closed the box one last time and walked out of the chamber with tears that no one dared mention. A new emperor was crowned, and his first appointment, royal seat-bearer, Obasi's son. The cycle continued, and no one saw the throne as clearly as the man kneeling behind it in the kingdom of Valasha. Holiness smelled like rot. Queen Mother Orlanda, the self-proclaimed divine, regent of light, stood at the pinnacle of spiritual authority. Her word was scripture. Her law was eternal. And her most sacred commandment, no one shall bathe. To cleanse the flesh, she declared, was to strip away divine burden. Water was temptation. Clean skin was vanity. And to wash was to insult the suffering of the saints who died in filth for their faith. Her sermons echoed through the citadel like thunder. Let dirt cling to your bones, for so did the martyrs suffer. Let your skin weep with sores, for so did the blessed endure. Faithful wept, nodding through the stench. Their bodies layered with filth they no longer noticed. It began with a decree: all baths were to be sealed. Soap was outlawed. Linen washed too often was to be confiscated and burned. But Queen Orlando did not stop there. She created a sacred inquisition. They came at night, men dressed in charcoal robes, who smelled the linens of noble homes examined. Fingernails for signs of cleansing, inspected children for suspicious cleanliness. If you used too much water, if your shirt was too white, if your breath smelled too fresh, you were summoned. Those caught bathing were tried for heresy. Their punishment: public scourging or worse, immolation in the square before the temple of purity. Even whispers of hygiene were dangerous. A midwife was burned alive after a jealous neighbor accused her of boiling water before childbirth. A scholar vanished after suggesting that disease might be lessened with hand-washing. A family was exiled when their daughter was seen near the river, her feet damp. The kingdom twisted itself into silent obedience. Rivers ran empty. Wells grew stagnant. Aqueducts were dismantled brick by brick. The old public bathhouses, once places of healing and prayer, were filled with stone and sealed with curses. But not all obeyed. In the southern district, a young woman named Rangyaborn of the ancient Washari risked everything to keep the rights of her ancestors alive. She bathed in secret, collected rainwater at night, sang the old cleansing songs in whispers. Her family had passed these rituals down for generations, acts of dignity, not defiance, until one night she was caught, dragged before the court, her body still wet. Rania stood barefooted in a temple soaked with incense and lies. The queen approached her slowly, face powdered with ash, breath thick with the perfume of rot, her own hair crawling beneath layers of powdered fat. She stared at Rania's glistening skin with disgust and something deeper, jealousy. "You dare scrub away the blessings of divine discomfort," she hissed. "I dare to feel clean," Rania whispered, "because the gods do not live in filth." Was burned that same evening, but the spark did not die. Across Valasha, people remembered. They remembered how good it felt to be clean, how the rivers once shimmered with healing, how children once laughed in the water. And though Queen Orlando reigned another 20 years, each season brought more quiet defiance, secret water rituals, hidden soap recipes, silent baths in moonlight. By the time her body finally collapsed bloated, fevered, and crawling with insects, her priests could not touch her. Her stench filled the palace halls for days. But her laws died with her. The rivers flowed, again the soap returned, and Rania's name was carved on the stones of every new bush. Not as a heretic, but as a saint, the servants whispered long before. She arrived, Countess Malady of Orlane, once the most sought after. Beauty in the entire realm had returned to her family estate after nearly a decade hidden from court. No carriages announced her, no trumpets played. Only the creak of wagon wheels and the scent of blood and lilies. They said she wore veils not for mourning but to hide her face. Her body, once draped in diamonds, now shook under plain gray cloth. Her eyes, once painted with gold dust, sank deep into her skull. Her breath carried the scent of rot. What had reduced her to this? The court doctors called it the fever of the flesh. But those who knew the truth whispered a darker name: the lover's curse. A venereal sickness passed from bed to bed, spreading among nobles who believed their status made them untouchable. Malady had been adored until the disease ravaged her skin, blackened her gums, and hollowed her bones. And when her beauty was gone, so was the court's affection. In desperation, her healers turned to ancient remedies. One of them, pulled from forgotten Washari scrolls, called for a bath of warm goat's milk, said to soothe the burning skin, said to draw out the poison, so the servants poured pails of fresh milk into her obsidian tub. Warmed with lavender and crushed herbs, they stripped her slowly, careful not to tear the fragile skin that now peeled like old parchment. Countess Malady sank into the bath in silence. The milk around her turned grayish-white, laced with blood from open sores. Her breath rattled, her fingers trembled. But for the first time in months, her muscles stopped screaming. And then came the gift. She ordered the servants to bottle the milk. "All of it," she croaked. "The poor need it more than I." The household, stunned and eager to obey, delivered it to the outer villages as an act of charity. Dozens of bottles filled with the same liquid that had soaked her diseased body. The same milk now swimming with invisible death. Mothers fed it to their children. Old men thanked the heavens. Hungry families drank it with prayers on their lips. Days later, the fevers began. The rash, the coughing, the shaking. The rot the village healers didn't understand. The milk had smelled sweet. The bottles had been sealed. But within a week, entire families were dead. And Countess Malady, she never knew. Wrapped in silk, she passed peacefully days later, believing she had died with grace, having given the last of herself to those in need. The city held a vigil in her name. Portraits were painted, streets renamed, coins minted with her veiled profile, and none of them knew that the Countess's final gift had been a death. Sentence disguised as kindness, that the worst atrocities aren't always born from cruelty, but from blind, well-dressed ignorance. In the kingdom of Aloria, beauty was measured in inches the height of a woman's hair, and no one's crown stood taller than that of Princess Imani of House Delvera. Her hair was not just a style, it was a spectacle, a monument, a political statement. Constructed daily with carved ivory combs, twisted gold wires, and enough bare fat to grease an entire palace gate. Towering 2 feet above her brow, powdered blue and pearled at the tips, It shimmered like a heavenly sculpture, but step too close, and the illusion bled. Because that beautiful structure wasn't just hair, it was a living ecosystem. Beneath the powder, fat, and ribbons lived lice, ticks, and swarms of flea colonies. They nested inside the folds, laying eggs in warm pockets behind her ears, feeding on her scalp, wriggling in the grease like parasites in a banquet. Her maids began at dawn brushing, lifting, layering. Each section had to be built from memory, reinforced with pins, and sprayed with powdered starch. It took 6 hours just to prepare her for breakfast. They often gagged behind her, suppressing the smell of sour oil, dead skin, and insect waste that rose with every motion. But Amani, she smiled, because she had no choice. To remove her towering coiffure would mean shame. To admit that her scalp itched like fire, that it bled in places, that it smelled like rot wood mean weakness. She had to hold still as insects moved between strands like dancers. She had to wave graciously with her perfumed hand while flea bites dotted her shoulders. She had to laugh through dinners while her scalp peeled beneath an empire of filth, and worse, she wasn't alone. Every woman at court bore a similar crown. Some fashioned their hair like ships, others like sunbursts. All used the same recipe: ox fat, ash, dried lavender, and honey resin. Each concoction smelled sweet for a day, then it rotted, then it festered. But still they wore it day after. Dabby, 'cause vanity was survival. The scratching sticks became status symbols, crafted from pearl, engraved with sigils tucked into sleeves or sashes. The ladies would excuse themselves during conversation with graceful nods, then slide the stick into their constructions. Digging quietly, sighing with relief, behind the ballrooms and banquets, behind the painted faces and jeweled gowns, the palace echoed with the sound of scratching, sometimes subtle, sometimes desperate. And at night, as the pillows moved, soft shudders as insects disembarked from royal heads in search of warmth, the physicians warned of infection. Princess Amani had already lost hair in patches. Her scalp was raw in places. One night she bled through the entire pillow and still insisted on wearing her crown the next morning, because court rumors were fatal. And beauty, no matter how diseased, still ruled. Her wigs became heavier, her skin paler, her shoulders ached. But she kept smiling through ceremonies, kept dancing through banquets, kept accepting compliments on her radiance while pus oozed beneath her curls. By the time she turned 24, her hairline had retreated halfway up her skull. The crown she wore wasn't made of real hair anymore. It was goat's wool, painted and dyed, stuck with honey, and nailed into her scalp with pins. She fainted during her birthday gala. The lice hadn't killed her. The weight of her hair had, but even as she collapsed, the nobles applauded, thinking it was part of the performance. Because in Aloria, sickness was style, pain was poise, and the women with the highest hair were always the first to fall. The palace of Zanaraya was the pride of the continent, a masterpiece of gold leaf columns, its crystal domes and courtyards paved with obsidian tiles. Visitors compared it to the heavens. Artists wept, trying to paint it. Poets wrote sonnets about its gardens, but they never mentioned the smell, because inside the palace's golden gates, behind its silk curtains and velvet halls, lay the secret. No outsider was allowed to witness. Zanaraya was a sewer, not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. At its peak, over 12,000 nobles, guards, servants, and bureaucrats lived within its gleaming walls. But in his obsession with perfection, Emperor Calyx had neglected one small matter: plumbing. There were no working drains, no waste system, no functional toilets that could accommodate the flood of bodies that passed through the palace every day. So the palace adapted, not with innovation, but with denial. People relieved themselves where they stood, behind tapestries, in corners, inside fireplaces. Some urinated into vases and flung the contents from balconies into the inner courtyards. One servant girl recalled seeing a noblewoman delicately lift her skirts and pee onto a woven rug during a diplomatic banquet, never breaking conversation. Waste trickled down staircases. It soaked into imported carpets from the Eastern Isles. It pooled beneath marble statues of the gods. Perfumed incense burned day and night, not for atmosphere, but as a desperate defense against human rot. The children of nobles learned to walk. Around puddles of feces, servants developed special shoes with raised soles to avoid soaking through. Royal hounds licked urine from polished floors. No one addressed the filth aloud. It had simply become part of court life, until it started falling from the sky. One afternoon, during the spring ball, Empress Murata, draped in pink silk and crowned in aquamarine, was walking through the west courtyard when a stream of liquid waste splashed onto her gown from an upper window. Her scream echoed for miles. That was not an accident. That was every Tuesday. Even the royal kitchens weren't spared. The latrines on the upper floors leaked through the cracked lead pipes, drenching pantries and spoiling meat. Cook fires had to be doused when brown rain fell from the ceiling. Emperor Calix refused to admit failure. He forbade renovations. He claimed that the smell was the scent of civilization, the mark of progress of a living empire. So the courtiers adapted. Ceremonies were shortened to avoid the overwhelming stench. Diplomats were seated near perfumed vents. Perfume became an arms race season, bringing more pungent oils designed to mask the palace's collapse. But the sickness crept in. Cholera, dysentery, rot. It started with the children, then the cooks, then the ministers. Entire wings were sealed off when the floors gave way and spilled sewage into the guest halls. Still, the emperor smiled. Still, the songs were written, and none of them dared write the truth. That Zanariah, the jewel of the empire, was rotting from the inside out, not from war, not from rebellion, but from its own waste. In the end, when revolution finally came, the people didn't storm the gates. With swords, they came with buckets and shovels. They tore up the gold tiles, ripped down the velvet curtains. Underneath the wealth and wonder, they found the truth. An empire built on excrement, an illusion dressed in silk, a palace so blinded by its image that it drowned in its own filth.